This is a bilingual message and I will repeat it in English. Buenas tardes. El evento de esta tarde será bilingüe para fomentar la justicia del lenguaje en espacios comunitarios. Mi nombre es María Elena y hoy seré la intérprete junto con mi compañera Javi. La función de interpretación ya está activada. Si ustedes en su computadora, verá aparecer un globo terráqueo en la parte de abajo de su pantalla. Si está en su teléfono, va a haber 3 puntos en la parte de abajo. Haga clic en la interpretación de idiomas y seleccione el idioma que habla. Si usted no es bilingüe en inglés y español, debe escoger un canal de idioma. Si tiene algún problema accediendo a la interpretación, favor de comunicarse con nosotros vía chat. 3 pautas antes de empezar. Por favor, hablar una sola persona a la vez para que nosotros los intérpretes podamos captar todo lo que se dice. Les pedimos que todos los que hablen a un paso moderado, especialmente cuando están presentando contenido de números o direcciones o abreviaciones, ya que es cuando podemos tender a hablar más rápido. Mantenga sus micrófonos en mudo cuando nos esté hablando para evitar ruido de fondo. Y finalmente, cuando interpretamos al español se van a dar cuenta que usaremos la E o la X al final de las palabras en vez del uso tradicional a o, que se refiere a personas. Esto no es un error, sino una práctica intencional para incluir géneros no binarios. La justicia del lenguaje también incluye la justicia de género. Gracias y ahora el mensaje en inglés.
Good evening, everyone. Tonight's event will be bilingual to encourage language justice in community spaces. My name is Javi, and I'll be interpreting for you tonight with my colleague Maria Elena, who just gave the Spanish orientation for interpretation. The interpretation feature, as you can see, is now activated. If you're connected from a computer, you will see a globe at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you're connected from a mobile device, you will see 3 dots at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You're going to tap there and you're going to select language interpretation and choose English channel in this case. A reminder that if you're not bilingual in both of these languages, you have to select a language channel. If you have any trouble accessing the interpretation feature, we're here to help, so please let us know via the chat. A few guidelines before we begin. Please speak 1 person at a time so we can capture everything being shared. Please speak at a moderate pace, especially if you're going to be sharing any information, including numbers, addresses, acronyms, and proper nouns, as we tend to speak a little bit faster. And keep your mics on mute to avoid background noise. Finally, when we interpret into Spanish, you will notice that we use the E or X at the end of words referring to people. This is not a mistake. It is an intentional practice to include non-binary genders, because we believe that language justice also includes gender justice. Thank you so much for your time, and we may now begin this event.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Willie Luca. I'm one of the leaders of an organization called Buen Vecino. On behalf of Conejo Unido, I'm pleased to welcome you to our first ever virtual Thousand Oaks City Council Candidates Forum. Thank you for joining us. Conejo Unido is a coalition of 3 local groups: Adelante Comunidad Conejo, Thrive Conejo, and Buen Vecino. Collectively, we advocate for equity and inclusion in our community. Conejo Unido does not support or oppose any political party or candidate. All 10 candidates who are certified to be on the ballot in the Thousand Oaks City Council race were invited to participate in tonight's forum. We're pleased that 8 of the candidates accepted our invitation. Our purpose for this event is to provide the community an opportunity to learn about and compare the candidates. Sorry about my camera, by the way. Just look away. We're providing an opportunity to compare the candidates and their positions on issues of public interest in an educational, even-handed format to help voters make informed decisions in the upcoming election. For tonight's forum, Conejo Unido received many suggested questions submitted by attendees. There were so many that we won't have time to use them all, and we have developed some of our own questions for the candidates as well. You'll also see during our event that we're including video questions from Thousand Oaks residents. We want to be sure you know that closed captioning is available for those who want to use it. Look under the 3 dots and click subtitle. And now I'm pleased to give the floor to Leanne Holland, leader of Thrive Conejo, to introduce our moderator.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you for being here. It is my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for this evening, Dr. Lorena Munoz. In my opinion, Dr. Munoz is rather uniquely qualified to act as our moderator this evening. Dr. Munoz is the Associate Dean for Equity, Inclusion, and Engagement at California Lutheran University. She is part of the core team leading the university's work on diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice, which includes developing a strategic plan, creating events and programs, and supporting affinity groups. Dr. Munoz is also an associate professor and the director of Cal Lutheran's Race and Ethnic Studies program. She is an urban cultural geographer whose research has ranged from Latino street vendors in Los Angeles and South America to migrant and immigrant domestic workers in South Africa and the United States. Dr. Munoz is a strong advocate for grassroots civic engagement to lift the quality of life for all in our community. Through her work and by example, Dr. Munoz is making a difference in the way our community thinks about diversity, equity, and inclusion. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Lorena Munoz.
Well, good evening and welcome. I am so pleased to serve as the moderator for tonight's forum. First, I would like to share some guidelines for this event. Just moments ago, an online random drawing was held with candidates present to determine the order in which candidates will answer questions. You will see that each candidate has a number in front of their name on their Zoom screen. Those numbers are there to help me because candidates are referred to by number only in my script. The majority of tonight's questions will be answered by two candidates only, with each round pairing different candidates together. Using the random drawing and number system ensures that there is no predetermination of which candidates will answer which questions. Conejo Unido will provide candidates with a full list of questions after the forum and will post online any answers they wish to share. Questions were compiled from advanced audience submissions or created by the Conejo Unido leadership team. There will be no live audience questions. I ask that participants remain on mute to avoid noise disruptions. You are invited to use the reaction buttons in lieu of applause. Chat is available if you need to contact one of the hosts with a technical issue or question. I would also like to add that no photography, screenshots, or recordings are allowed, except by approved media for their reporting. Conejo Unido will post a recording of this event online within a week or so. Respect for these guidelines will help us have a great event. So now round one begins with each candidate giving an opening statement. You will each have 2 minutes and we will proceed in numerical order. Our first candidate statement will be given by Sharon McMahon. You have 2 minutes.
Hold just 1 second, please. I think Sharon just re-entered she may have gotten kicked off. Hold on just a minute. And are we able to spotlight the candidates?
As soon as they start their camera.
Okay, great. I think Sharon's back in. Wonderful. So we'll get the timer set up and then she can start her opening statement.
I'm sorry, I missed, were there any guidelines? How much time do I have?
2 minutes, and it's basically your opening statement.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Now?
Starting now.
Okay, so I moved here to the Conejo Valley from the San Fernando Valley in 1985. I moved here with my husband and my 1-year-old, and I raised my family here. And while I was here, from day one, I got involved in the community. I did a lot of volunteer work within the community. I did volunteer work with the city. I got involved in ad hoc committees And then I was appointed to the Traffic Commission, where I was there for 20 years, learning all about, safety around schools, about traffic mitigation and traffic circulation. I ended up on the Planning Commission after 20 years on the Traffic Commission. And I've been on the Planning Commission now for 6 years. I've been involved in a lot of really great hearings. A lot of things have gone on. And I feel that my time in the community has put me in a really good place to make the leap onto the city council. My goals are to keep us as safe as a city as we have been in the past. I'd like to put a lot of resources towards our first responders in order to do that. I want to maintain our open space and even grow it. And I want to work on the housing affordability problem. We have a long way to go with our housing issues, and that's a big priority for me. While we are looking at the mandates from the state, we don't want the state to take over how we do our housing. We don't want the state to push where we do our housing. We want to have control of it. And one of the things I'm looking forward to is voting for this new general plan update, which will place the housing that we need in just the right place in our city. And I think my time is up at this point.
Thank you. Our next candidate statement will be by Ed Jones. You have 2 minutes.
Pardon me, I was muted. Yeah, I'm Ed Jones. I've been here for many years and got involved early when I came. I was president of a homeowners association, and then I was selected to be on the committee to write the general plan. We had a lot of good advice. We had a company called the Leo Daily Company that would come down periodically from San Francisco and advise us. And they realized, and we realized, that we were in a beautiful valley, and we wanted to preserve as much of it as we could, and at the same time provide for housing because people wanted to live here. And so we had a general plan map that we laid out, and we provided for commercial at this core. We call it the barbell approach. The bar was Thousand Oaks Boulevard, which was to be commercial just on the street, facing the street, and then have malls at each end. Those were the two bells. And then we would fan out from there, with starting with higher density and then medium and major low density, with preserving the semi-rural atmosphere. I'm going through some detail on this to point out the fact that we realized our lovely setting, and we not only wanted to preserve it, we wanted to preserve the vistas so we could see that lovely setting. So we laid out plans, and we planned for open space, and we planned to preserve the oak trees. In fact, we passed ordinances to preserve oak trees and prevent building on ridge lines. And there are a couple that were built on while we were still unincorporated, but we obviously couldn't do anything about that. And what we had for our commercial areas, we undergrounded the utilities. We had setbacks of buildings. We provided for low monument signs. We did all this not only to protect the environment, but also, am I about out of time?
Yes.
I didn't get to my main point. I want to preserve that now by not allowing large, tall buildings on Thousand Oaks Boulevard. Thank you.
Thank you. So our next candidate statement will be by David Newman, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm David Newman, 21-year resident, 8-year planning commissioner, photographer, dog dad, cyclist, and grateful resident of one of the most beautiful and safest communities in the country. I'm running for city council to ensure our local government serves community interests, not special interests. Too many times I've seen government act in ways that mainly benefit large developers, not our residents. As a business owner, I know when to walk away from a deal that doesn't benefit both parties. As your council member, I'll fight for the public interest, for your interest. I'm proud to be the only candidate with the endorsements of Representative Julia Brownlee, Supervisor Linda Parks, and Councilmember Claudia Bilda La Peña. Also, and this is important, I do not accept donations from developers or lobbyists. My only interest is that of the voters. I'm David Newman, and I hope to earn your vote for City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Is candidate Jeff Schwartz here?
I don't believe he's joined us this evening.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so our next candidate statement will be by Kyle Rohrbach. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Munoz, and thank you to Conejo Unido for the opportunity to participate tonight in this forum. I think this is a particularly important group to be fielding some questions and discussion from, so thank you. My name is Kyle Rohrbach. I'm running for Thousand Oaks City Council, and I am proud to say that I grew up in Thousand Oaks. So, you know, when I look at the future of what the potential of Thousand Oaks is, it's really passed through the lens of the experience that I had growing up here. I am professionally a producer by trade. I work in unscripted television. Got my start on a kids show called Reading Rainbow, and now run an unscripted network. And in the community, I am proud to work as a board member for the Thousand Oaks Alliance for the Arts, where I served on the ad hoc committee for diversity, equity, inclusion. I also am a longtime volunteer for our youth and government program. I have deep roots here. There's a community that matters a tremendous amount to me, recognized by the Chamber of Commerce as 40 under 40, by our local YMCA association as an emerging leader. And now I want to take those professional and community backgrounds and really help bring them into the future of Thousand Oaks. You know, as you already heard from candidates tonight, we've got affordability issues that we have to address. We have a homelessness issue that is very topical and top of mind for our city. We have to prepare our city for a future that is going to be affected by a real climate crisis, and making sure that we're prepared for the consequences of that. And as we do all of it, we have to put a lens of equity and inclusion over every single one of those topics. And that's something I intend to do on City Council. So thank you for the time, and I'm looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you. And our next candidate statement will be by Anwil Khurshid, and you have 2 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Munoz. I'll wait for my timer here. And thanks to Conejo Unido for the opportunity to address the audience. My name is Anwil Khurshid. My wife, Mary, and I have happily called Thousand Oaks our home for the past 11 years. I have no background in politics. I'm self-funding my city council run. I just want to give back to the community that's brought so much joy to my family. And right now it's a critical time for the city. As you may all know, next year, the general plan is up for adoption, and that'll set the vision and the plan for the next 25 years for the city. And to me, there are 5 critical issues that are coming up for city council to address. One is preserving the character of the city, preserving the open space, the trees, the views that we have. 2 is reasonable affordable housing options for seniors and young couples. 3 is community safety. We are one of the safest cities. We want to maintain that for the future. 4 is to support our local businesses and make sure that we support small, medium, and large businesses in the city. And finally, there's the homelessness issue that we need to address with compassion. So that's why the city at this point needs some strong, independent and tough leadership to help shepherd and lead for the next 25 years. And I'm hopeful that I could give that to the city. I have a civil engineering background. I've also been practicing law for the past 20 years, and 8 years of that I was serving as an assistant U.S. attorney with financial fraud cases. So I could bring the unique skills that I could advocate for the city residents and do what's best for the city, and I'd be honored to have your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next candidate statement will be by Dan Tweed. You have 2 minutes.
Unmuted?
Yes.
Oh, it says I'm Dan Tweed. I'm running for the third time, actually, this election cycle. I've lived in Thousand Oaks for on and off for about 15 years. I currently am a live-in home care aide for a stroke survivor, and that's how I get my room and board by keeping 24/7 eyes on Larry, who's a great guy. In fact, we have great conversations. He's a Stanford dropout, but he's got such an amazing life, as I kind of have too. But I think I want cities and governments to start looking beyond just the immediate concerns, because I think what civilization really needs at this crisis point is a city to act as kind of a model for all of civilization, to say, hey, there's a city that's really thinking outside the box, that's talking about technological acceleration, because governments aren't talking about this exponential increase in technology and all the implications of that. We're not talking about being very resilient for big existential risks. We're actually in the 6th mass extinction. From the one that killed the dinosaurs was the 5th, and it looks like humans are causing this one right now. So these are big civilization-wide problems that we not only need to solve on a city level, but we can solve it for all cities and for all people on Earth. We have a problem with refugees worldwide. I think there's never been the hundreds of millions of refugees in the world that since World War II, and we can actually do things like seasteading. We can have large habitats on the ocean that utilize self-sufficient food systems and have job training and don't pollute. So big questions, that's what I want to look at, and I hope I get your vote.
Thank you. Our next candidate statement will be by Bob Engler. You have 2 minutes.
Yeah, good evening, Dr. Munoz, and thank you to Conejo Unido for putting this together. It's very nice to be able to speak with you all. I'm a 32-year resident here in Thousand Oaks, and I love it here. This is why I'm here. I will stay here for the rest of my life. I want to tell you a little bit about me. We'll get to issues sometime later in this program, but I want to tell you about me. I was honored to be able to be a firefighter for almost 30 years. And being a firefighter puts you in a position of trust. And what I mean by trust, I'll tell you a story. A woman calls you in the middle of the night, and she opens a door to you and says, I need help. You walk in the door, and then she hands you her baby. That is trust. That is the type of trust I enjoyed, and that's the type of trust that I bring to this position that I am. I am your current mayor, and I believe that every person has value and belongs in our community, that they trust that our government can help with some of the solutions to their problems. The city I know sees the best in people and puts people first. I'm realistic about the world, but I also have the words of Robert Kennedy that echo in my ears. Some people ask why, and I ask why not. This is who I am. I know we'll get into positions and everything else a little bit later, but I wanted to give you an idea of where I'm coming from and give you a thought of how I govern. Thank you so much for your time, and thanks for putting this on again.
Thank you, candidates. Now we will begin with question and answer. In this first round, the question is from Conejo Unido and will be answered by all candidates. We will begin with Ed Jones and proceed in numerical order. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. The first question is, if elected, what is the first item you would ask to have added to the board agenda and why? Ed Jones, you have 1 minute.
Well, that's an interesting question. I have a lot of things I'd like to do, and I'm trying to think right now what I might like to do first. I believe we have the tools in place at this time if we would accurately and efficiently use them. In other words, I hearken back to the general plan that I spoke of. Well, see, one thing that we did when we designed this community, and then when we did the initial planning and action, we took measures to save the environment and to protect the oak trees and so forth, as I said before. And we also required developers to develop open land for open space, et cetera, et cetera. And I'd like to make sure that we proceed in this manner to particularly save the environment. I see I'm out of time.
Thank you. David Newman, the question is to you, and I will repeat it once for the audience. If elected, what is the first item you would ask to have added to the board agenda and why? You have 1 minute.
It's a tough call because, as Ed mentioned, there are multiple priorities and they're all important. As we discussed last night, I think it's very important on the topic of DEI that everyone, all of our residents in this community, understand and feel that their government is there for them and that works for them. And on that point, I would like to see not only a staff DEI officer, but also the formation of a permanent full-time DEI commission, similar to what we have with planning or traffic. And that commission could educate public and bring actionable items to our city council. I'm also in favor of immediate action on climate and adoption of our climate emergency plan as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Kyle Bobrecht, same question. You have 1 minute.
This is a really excellent question, and I think certainly concur with the last two candidates that, you know, it would be carefully identifying a single issue because the city is faced with so many. But in an effort to be transparent, and I think in the intention of the question, I think it's about recognizing the intersectionality of so many of the issues that we're talking about, right? The crossover of DEI, along with climate change. And to me, one of our top issues that we have to address in this city that affects all of them is the affordability of being here, because it goes straight to access. It goes straight to the ability to live here and not worry, hopefully so often, where your next paycheck is coming from and if you'll be able to make your next paycheck. And we know that housing often affects those in our marginalized populations as well. So I would advocate for us moving up conversations on our inclusionary housing program here in Thousand Oaks.
Thank you. And Will Khurshid, you have same question. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Doctor. Affordable housing would be the first thing I try to tackle out of those 5 priorities, I believe. I would propose a program called Hometown Heroes, where you have affordable housing assistance given to law enforcement, firefighters, healthcare providers, teachers, active military and veterans, and you give them down payment and closing cost assistance. I would also focus on the fund, the Affordable Housing Fund and Trust, to increase the fees that developers need to pay to give in money into the funds, which will be used for affordable housing for these people that need it across our community. I think those are the 2 things that we could work on. As for the affordable housing, currently only 10% of developments need to give affordable housing units. We need to up that, and or the developers need to pay a fee, which is really low in my opinion. We need to up that. So those are certain things that I would propose immediately.
Thank you. And Will Khurshid, same question. You have 1 minute.
That was me. I think Dan is next.
Oh, sorry, Dan Tweed. I'm sorry, Dan Tweed. Same question. You have 1 minute.
Well, I am a graduate of the SEARCH program here in town, the Community Emergency Response Teams, which is a auxiliary of FEMA, because FEMA realizes that in a life-threatening mass emergency, they don't have the personnel. So we really need more SEARCH kind of health and safety awareness. Now, something that I find very interesting that some cities are doing is they are using drones to dispatch what are called AEDs, automated external defibrillators. And we have an elderly population here. We probably have people that are having cardiac incidents. And if you put one of these defibrillators on a drone, it could be at the side of a person having a heart attack in a matter of minutes. It could be a real life-saving thing. And a drone like this could be used for all kinds of civic and health and safety functions, from fire spotting to surveillance of criminal activity. I guess my time's up. Yeah, get the city drone to save lives.
Thank you. Bob Engler, same question. You have 1 minute.
Well, thank you so much for the question. It's a good question. There are many topics that we need to address, but I think the one that has the crossover in many other areas is our housing issue. The best way we can approach our housing affordability issue especially is by expanding and revisiting our inclusionary housing ordinance, which typically right now is set at 0. So we need to realistically look at our inclusionary housing ordinance. We have hired a consultant at the city to come in and help us determine what is a suitable number that we can ask of our developers. In the past, we asked our developers to give us land, to put in roads, to build fire stations. That was called a community benefit. The community benefit now is that we need to have affordable housing for those people who want to live in our community.
Thank you. Sharon McMahon, same question. You have 1 minute.
Sorry about that. I have a dog that is not very good at Zoom. The inclusionary ordinance is of a strong priority for me. I think we are working on that within the city. So the thing that I would put on the agenda first would be something from my actions throughout the city. All my talking and participating in social volunteers, and also through the campaign, I've talked to so many people, and I'm concerned that there are a lot of people that are not being heard. They don't seem to have a voice. And what I'd like to set up is an ad hoc committee with representatives of these communities that don't seem to be getting heard. And I'd like that to meet with 1 or 2 of the council members along with staff and address things that we just aren't aware of and we can't be aware of with those representatives. And that way we can work things out for the benefit of our community members that aren't being heard.
Thank you. Our next round will be Conejo Unido questions, with the candidates answering in pairs. The first question will be directed to candidate David Newman. We don't have the other candidates, so we'll just have one for this round, and then there will be pairs as we go along. So candidate David Newman will be answering first, and the question is, not all city spaces are accessible to residents with disabilities and older adults, and the challenges go beyond mere physical access. What would you do to gain more understanding of the needs of these community members and to make public and open spaces more accessible to all? You have 1 minute.
Thank you. That's an excellent question and a great segue from the previous question, because we have to start by understanding that DEI is not just about race or just about sexual orientation. It's a much broader field. It definitely includes persons with intellectual or physical disabilities. Seniors may have special needs. It's a very broad area. And so job one is education, is making our residents and our city government understand that. And this is one thing that a DEI commission could do, is bring education about what that is, and then bring actionable items such as how do we make our public facilities more accessible to all residents. So while I don't have specific suggestions about that, I think a DEI commission would, and I would welcome those suggestions.
Thank you. The next Conejo Unido question will be directed to candidate Kyle Roback and candidate Anwil Khurshid. And you will have also 1 minute to answer. The question is, in the city of Thousand Oaks, the allocation for policing is greater than any other expenditure in the budget. Yet some community members do not feel protected or feel at risk when interacting with police. If elected, how would you establish accountability and make changes to current practices so that our police will better serve all members of the community? Candidate Kyle Roback, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. If anyone's taking a look at our city budget, which is generally a 2-year budget cycle, we spend a tremendous amount on contracting out with the Ventura County Sheriff's Office. And I want to use an example from our vulnerable populations officers who are paid through our contract with the Sheriff's Office, who do a remarkable job and I think set a model for how we can work with certain marginalized populations. But it shouldn't just be limited to those who are homeless and living on our streets, right? There is a long-standing discord and objective discord between our marginalized populations and law enforcement, and it has to start with listening. It has to also start with trust, because we hear a lot from those folks and they feel unheard. So we have to build those relationships. And I would start by working with our police chief and making sure that they understand that we have to start by listening.
Thank you. Next up is Anwil Khurshid, and the question to you is, in the city of Thousand Oaks, the allocation for policing is greater than any other expenditure in the budget. Yet some community members do not feel protected or feel at risk when interacting with the police. If elected, how would you establish accountability and make changes to current practices so that our police will better serve all members of the community? You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Doctor, for that question. I think outreach is key and partnerships are key between our law enforcement and our community residents all over, regardless of socioeconomic status, regardless of their walk of life. I think the key is to have this communication and the bridge built between our law enforcement and our community. I think the way you do that is through outreach programs and through outreach officers. I think the Ventura County Sheriff's Office has done a great job to keep our community safe. It's the safest in the country, or one of the safest in the country, and probably the safest in the state. I want to continue to promote that because regardless of your status, regardless of where you're living in Thousand Oaks, you want a safe place to live, and you want to be able to go to your officers and your deputies and reach out to them for help if you need it. And I think it's really important to create those bridges between the law enforcement and our residents. And that's what I would do, and work with the police, the chief, and do that for the city.
Thank you. The next Conejo Unido question will be directed to Dan Tweed and Bob Engler, with Dan Tweed answering first. And the question is, the city is making progress on addressing the needs of the unhoused by creating additional permanent supportive housing and plans for an emergency shelter. Yet gaps in the system continue to exist. What would be your vision of a robust housing safety net that's inclusive for all our community members facing or experiencing homelessness in Thousand Oaks? You have 1 minute.
Yeah, it's a great issue because really we're kind of on a homeless planet until we back up civilization with a multiplanetary species, but that's a little broad. But we could build extremely low cost bicycle campers, for example. There are plans where you can make a little covered wagon looking thing out of coroplast, that corrugated plastic that you see the election signs made of. A couple $100, you can build something like this. You can actually sleep in and tow behind a bicycle. We could designate dignity parking areas for people that are sheltering in their vehicles or sheltering with something like a bicycle camper. This is something that you could do in a matter of days, and it would we also need more public facilities, drinking fountains, portable compost toilets. You know, we actually need to get away from the flush toilet, but that's another issue with the water crisis. So yeah, I would do these low cost nomadic mobile shelters.
Thank you. Next up is Bob Engler, and the question to you is, the city is making progress on addressing the needs of the unhoused by creating additional permanent supportive housing and plans for an emergency shelter. Yet gaps in the system continue to exist. What would be your vision of a robust housing safety net that's inclusive for all of our community members facing or experiencing homelessness in Thousand Oaks? You have 1 minute.
Thank you. I'm actually immensely proud of how the city has approached this in the last year, last couple of years, actually. We have taken a multifaceted approach on addressing our homeless populations. We have continued to support our nonprofit sector. We have several nonprofits in the area that are active in supporting people who are experiencing homelessness now and providing them with shelter. We are actively supporting those, but we've also taken direct action as well. We've created a permanent supportive housing location using state money. We're looking at a transitional housing program in one of our surplus neighborhoods. We're also, and I think as importantly, we are looking at providing a for sale affordable housing project at our Hillcrest site. These are the types of things that we need to do to be totally envelop this issue so that we can make some progress.
Thank you. The next Conejo Unido question will be directed to Sharon McMahon and Ed Jones, with Sharon McMahon answering first. The question is, what is your understanding regarding the severity of the climate crisis and the urgency of climate action? And what more should our city be doing to address climate change? You have 1 minute.
That is a tough question. There is so much that we need to learn and so much that we don't know yet. We do need to plan ahead. We need to conserve our water resources. I'd like to see more retention of our water. That is, to me, a critical thing. You look at your backyard rain barrel and it fills up in a rainstorm in 20 minutes. If we can capture the water from all our large structures, that would help with our drought. We also have to lean more towards electric power vehicles and make it easier for the residents to have electric hookups throughout the city. I'd like to see incentives for the city and our residents to do more solar on their houses and do more on our city structures. I know the city's been doing a bit of that already, but I'd like to see more of it.
Thank you. Next up is Ed Jones, and the question to you is, what is your understanding regarding the severity of the climate crisis and the urgency of climate action? And what more should our city be doing to address climate change? You have one.
The crisis is severe and we don't know where it's going because we're experiencing natural events that we've never seen before, judging by what's going on in Florida right now and all the fires we're having here. So we need, first of all, to put less carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. I believe all of this is triggering the fires, and it may be also influencing the hurricanes because they're coming more frequently and with greater severity. But what can we do right here? Well, we've been talking about capturing the water from the Hill treatment plant, Hill Canyon. It already has tertiary treatment. So with some further treatment, it could become potable water and could be recycled back into the community. We're developing a well right now on the golf course at our Los Robles Greens. And well, I'm out of time, but I think we should do whatever we can to conserve water and pollute less, okay?
Thank you, candidates. Our next question.
Dr. Munoz,
Yes.
my apologies for interrupting, but Jeff Schwartz was able to join us.
Oh, great.
And so if maybe you can direct the first question in the round to him to answer, that would be great. The question on accessibility.
Okay, yes. So candidate Jeff Schwartz, welcome. The question is to you and you have 1 minute to answer. Not all city spaces are accessible to residents with disabilities and older adults, and the challenges go beyond mere physical access. What would you do to gain more understanding of the needs of these community members and to make public and open spaces more accessible to all? You have 1 minute.
Hi, thank you for allowing me to join this forum. So the question is regarding accessibility, and that is an issue for people who have trouble with accessibility. So seriously, this is something that needs to be discussed at a level with the community. I believe that the representatives for the people who are seeking access, for the people who are not getting access, should get together with the people who are in charge of these facilities. And if it has to do with a city facility of any sort, the city should do everything it can to make sure that everything is accessible to everyone in the community. If it's a private facility we're talking about, then we need to negotiate, and the city council members can take part in that negotiation. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates. Our next question is a video question and will be answered by 4 candidates, beginning with Jeff Schwartz. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. The video question comes from Claudia Grimaldo, a 17-year resident of Thousand Oaks. Please start the video.
Hola, mi nombre es Claudia, soy madre soltera y he vivido en Thousand Oaks por 17 años. Me preocupa la situación actual que estamos viviendo en nuestra ciudad por los altos costos de vivienda. Actualmente mi madre y mi hermana viven conmigo porque no pueden pagar una vivienda para ellas. Tengo 2 trabajos, pero no es suficiente y mis hijos me necesitan. Mientras los proyectos a futuro están en puerta, ¿qué podemos hacer en el tiempo presente para ayudar a las personas y familias que, como yo, viven con miedo mes con mes de perder sus hogares o no poder pagar sus rentas por los altos costos?
The translation is, hello, my name is Claudia. I'm a single mother and have lived in Thousand Oaks for 17 years. I am concerned about the current situation that we are experiencing in our city due to high cost of housing. Currently, my mother and sister live with me because they cannot afford a home for themselves. I have 2 jobs, but it is not enough and my children need me. While future projects are in development, what can we do in the present time to help people and families like me who live in fear month after month of losing their homes and not being able to pay their rent due to high costs? Jeff Schwartz, you have 1 minute.
We have 2 issues. One is the short-term issue and the other is the long-term issue. In the short term, what we can do is we can come together as a civil society to help those in need. We already have voluntary organizations that are doing these things. We have food banks, we have Salvation Army, we have Kiwanis Club, we have the Rotary Club, Lions Club, and we need to encourage more of our citizens to join these organizations and help out in a voluntary way to help out those in need. The long term is, what's the cause of this? And the cause of this is price inflation, which is caused by basically government debt. The government is spending way too much money. We've got to streamline government because it's wasting our money and we are losing wealth, and the dollar is being devalued because of that. I'm Jeff Schwartz for Thousand Oaks City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. And Will Rashid, the question is to you, and I will repeat the question once for the audience. While future projects are in development, What can we do in the present time to help people and families like me who live in fear month after month of losing their homes and not being able to pay their rent due to high costs? You have 1 minute.
Thank you, and Doctor. And it's really sad to see someone like Claudia struggling. And what we need to do is provide help to people who are struggling. And I think the way to do that in the short term is through public, private, nonprofit coalitions. The city is spending tons of money on different things. Perhaps we could help fund some of these nonprofits, some of these public oriented programs, which could help people like Claudia with housing needs, with food needs. I'm certain that the city has done a great job in dealing with many mansions and some of the food banks in the area, but we need to continue on providing funding and providing support to those types of organizations, and also bring in some of the larger organizations like the Salvation Army, get in some state help, get in some regional help, and also perhaps get some federal help. There are grants out there that we could seek to help people like Claudia with their housing and food shortage type of needs, and help them to get on their feet.
Thank you. Bob Engler, same question. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you. And Claudia, our hearts go out to you. And I know this is a hard road to be on. And our thoughts are with you on this. I think that one of my colleagues on the panel here said that there is a short-term issue and a long-term issue. The short-term issue, I think we have to rely on our nonprofits in the area. I was the president of the Manna Food Pantry. Manna Food Pantry is happy to provide almost all the food you will need for an entire month and take that bill off your table. There are senior concerns for your mother. If your mother is of an age, they can help her. But most importantly, I think we need to look toward the future and really learn that we need to provide more housing for people here in our area. You are the type of person that we want to keep in our area. You're a hard worker. You're someone we like and want to have here. So please don't give up. Avail yourself of the help that's out there.
Thank you. Ed Jones, same question. You have 1 minute.
What was the question again, please?
Sure. While future projects are in development, what can we do in the present time to help people and families like me who live in fear month after month of losing their homes or not being able to pay their rent due to high costs?
Well, we're taking steps, as Mayor Engler pointed out earlier. We have just had a ribbon cutting on a facility that is going to provide 72 units for people to live in at a low cost. We have taken other steps in that regard, but the immediate problem is the fact that our values have gone up so high that this is a very hard place to live in if you don't have a sufficient income. And this was a byproduct of all the wonderful planning I spoke about in my first answer. We didn't know that by creating this lovely environment, we were also at the same time going to create this terrific rise in the price of housing. So I would just suggest that if for the interim, until we get more of this developed that we're doing right now, in other words, we're in the process, that you're going to have to avail yourself of these services that were mentioned earlier, Manna and so forth. But I'm sorry about your plight.
Thank you. Our next round will consist of questions submitted in advance by attendees, with the candidates answering in pairs. The first question will be directed to Kyle Robrack and Ed Jones, with Kyle Robrack answering first. And the question is, short-term rentals like Airbnb have increased and are basically unregulated here in Thousand Oaks. The proliferation of short-term rental harms, in many cases, most neighborhoods by increasing the parking of cars, loitering, loud parties, excessive trash, etc. Other cities, like Calabasas, have been able to more successfully regulate these rentals. What specific actions will you take to help control these businesses and improve our neighborhoods? Kyle Robrack, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. That is a really topical question. And I think this is a good opportunity to point out that, you know, often candidates and I think city council members aren't experts in issues that involve many different subject areas. So in this case, you're talking about something that involves a large private company that has policies and operational procedures that operate all throughout the country, as well as real potential law enforcement concerns. So I think this is where the city establishes an ad hoc committee that takes a look at some very real concerns from citizens so that we can make sure that we're hearing those concerns, but then involving the parties that are experts in those areas to come up with a reasonable plan to move forward and make sure that people feel like not only their needs are being heard, but that they're being addressed and acted on. So I would advocate for an ad hoc committee in this case.
Thank you. Next up is Ed Jones, and the question to you is, short-term rentals like Airbnb have increased and are basically unregulated here in Thousand Oaks. The proliferation of short-term rentals harms, in many cases, most neighborhoods by increasing the parking of cars, loitering, loud parties, excessive trash, etc. Other cities like Calabasas have been able to more successfully regulate these rentals. What specific actions will you take to help control these businesses and improve our neighborhood? Ed Jones, you have 1 minute.
Well, I don't like them at all. I don't know why people would do that here. We're not a vacation destination here in Thousand Oaks. I don't know what their mindset is. I don't know what their goal is to do that. I think if it requires a change in the law, then we ought to change the law. I think when we do zoning ordinances, that we ought to make sure that the qualifications for those residents to live there are city qualified, are city ordinances that plan for low density, medium density, high density, and so forth. And to me, this can just upset neighborhoods. I don't like it at all. And I don't know if it's federal law or state law that seems to authorize these things, but wherever, to whatever extent we can do it with a municipal ordinance, I think we ought to regulate them, and we ought to press for the state to change the law. I don't think we ought to have them at all.
Thank you. The next audience question will be directed to Anwil Khurshid and David Newman, with Anwil Khurshid answering first. The question is, can the city do anything about the lack of water we are facing? Anwil Khurshid, you have 1 minute.
I truly wish we could do something about the lack of water. And I think there are things we can do. For example, I think we should have more reclaimed water usage for the landscaping, the beautiful landscaping that we have. I think we could invest some money and some time in extending out our reclaimed water usage. I think Sharon mentioned the capture of water. I think that's a way where we could try to capture and reuse water. Bob mentioned a potential, or was it Ed? I don't recall. One of the two council members mentioned reusing water at our water treatment facilities, and we might be able to reuse those for landscaping and other things. So I think those are certain ways. We can't really make water, we could reuse it. The other thing is to incentivize drought tolerant and drought resistant landscaping. That's give funds to incentivize that. So I think those are certain ways where, until we start getting some more rain, to help with the water issue. My apologies for going over.
Thank you. Next up is David Newman, and the question to you is, can the city do anything about the lack of water we are facing? David Newman, you have 1 minute.
The city is doing two things right now. One is, as has been mentioned previously, is promoting as much reuse, recapture, and reuse as possible. And we're using a carrot and stick approach on that, where there is an education effort. There's a lot of good information on the city's website about ways to capture and reuse water. And there's an enforcement effort as well. If you go over the current restrictions, the city has officers out on the weekends to enforce overuse of water. The longer term issue is that it is more of a regional one. We're not a water island. We are working in conjunction with other governments in our region to take a holistic approach to reuse and maybe identify new sources of water so that our crisis will be mitigated. Thank you.
Thank you. The next audience question will be directed to Dan Tweed and Jeff Schwartz, with Dan Tweed answering first. And the question is, the housing element of the general plan promises that the city will update its inclusionary housing ordinance. What do you recommend the inclusionary housing ordinance should require? Dan Tweed, you have 1 minute.
Well, it's a good point, because at one point, Thousand Oaks actually had some restrictive covenants in their housing sales. But we should be looking at things like co-housing, shared housing, cooperative housing, resident-owned communities. These are all things the city could partner with the residents in putting together. I also think that land trusts, land development trusts, where the housing is guaranteed not to go, it's guaranteed to stay affordable, basically, is written into the trust, the binding trust. And intentional communities are something that also is great. You should live with people that are like-minded, and we're really not taking advantage of resident-owned intentional communities to the extent that we could be. And as far as inclusiveness, just enforce those anti-discrimination codes that are on the books, and that should be a good start.
Thank you. Next up is Jeff Schwartz, and the question to you is, the housing element of the general plan promises that the city will update its inclusionary housing ordinance. What do you recommend the inclusionary housing ordinance should require? Jeff Schwartz, you have 1 minute.
Well, first of all, we already have laws against housing discrimination. So if somebody is discriminated for, things like race, religion, country of national origin, that's already illegal. The courts can take care of this. So I don't even know why we need these ordinances. The laws are already on the books. These create the need for a bureaucracy to administer these ordinances. Central planning generally has, in history, unintended negative consequences. We have Ed Jones, who's been planning this city for years, and he said he didn't even imagine that some of his restrictionary plans were going to create increased housing prices that were unaffordable to people. And I'm sure he didn't do that purposely. It's unintended negative consequences of government regulations. We need to free this market, because free markets bring lower prices, bring greater efficiencies, bring greater abundance. A generation or two ago, one person could afford to work full time and own a house. And the government's too big, the taxes are too big, the deficits are too big.
You're out of time, I'm
inflation's
sorry.
too big.
Thank you. The next audience question will be directed to Bob Engler and Sharon McMahon, with Bob Engler answering first. And the question is, recent city council meetings have focused heavily on pending rent increases in local mobile home parks. What actions should the city council take regarding this issue? Bob Engler, you have 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you for that question. That is very topical, as we just talked about that on Tuesday. The issue really is that if you go back 10 years, there was an agreement that was arrived at by the owners of the parks, the city, and also the residents of the park. That led to a formula that worked very well in the last 10 years or so. And then this year we have a spike in the CPI on which this formula is based. Mobile home residents are the only group in the city that have a form of rent control. By opening, and I asked this question several times, can we only talk about the rate of increase? And I was told repeatedly that we were not able to do that. By opening the ordinance, we would put the people of the mobile home parks at risk for further restrictions because it now would be a negotiation with the park owners that may not end as well as we would like.
Thank you. Next up is Sharon McMahon, and the question to you is, recent city council meetings have focused heavily on pending rent increases in local mobile home parks. What actions should the city council take regarding this issue? Sharon McMahon, you have 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. It is very topical. What we're looking at is a problem that is region-wide, statewide, nationwide. It's a problem of not enough housing and the housing being too expensive. It's a community problem. It's a human problem. And I don't think we can solve it on the backs of landlords. The whole community has to pull together. We need to have more FHA, Section 8 housing for these communities. We need to help many mansions because they help with rental assistance. The people in the mobile home park have access to food at Manna. They have access to other social services, but it's an easy out to just blame the landlords when the landlords are not the sole problem. The problem is a community problem, and you cannot solve it on the backs of the landlords. And I'm very much opposed to trying to do that.
Thank you. Our next round will be a Conejo Unido question to all candidates, with Anwil Khurshid answering first. The question is, last February, after much debate, the City Council passed a resolution denouncing bigotry, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and hate speech after white supremacists tried to spread fear and hate in our city. What role do you believe that city leaders should play in dismantling systemic racism and stopping racist intimidation tactics in Thousand Oaks? Anwil Khurshid, you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Doctor. Yes, it's very important for the City Council to take a proactive approach to stamping out this type of hateful speech. It has done so with its ordinances prior to. It's as many of the candidates have spoken about with the focus on diversity, inclusion, and belonging in the city staff and in the city programs. That's a great step. It's also about education. And you know, one thing that's difficult for the city is that it is a municipality and it can't do too much to stop First Amendment rights either. So you need to be able to balance the First Amendment rights of even people that you despise or even people that you disagree with. Of course, this type of speech is unacceptable, but sometimes you need to let these people air it out and show themselves to the light, because that's what we want to happen, for them to be out in the light and not under rocks, hiding under rocks where you don't know what they're saying. So I think that's key for the city to still maintain a proactive stance on this issue.
Thank you. Dan Tweed, the question is to you, and I will repeat it once for the audience. Last February, after much debate, the City Council passed a resolution denouncing bigotry, white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and hate speech after white supremacists tried to spread fear and hate in our city. What role do you believe that city leaders should play in dismantling systemic racism and stopping racist intimidation tactics in Thousand Oaks? Dan Tweed, you have 1 minute.
You know, it's interesting because the Libertarian Party recently removed a plank from their platform that said we repudiate bigotry as repugnant and hateful, and now they also took out their abortion plank, and now they seem to have attracted all these crypto kind of white racist types. So it is important to be verbose in your rebuke of hate speech. You know, hate speech is really a category of threat that, you know, it can be very abusive and stressful. So it's something to take seriously. It's something to shine light on, and it's something to put education on and figure out, you know, why people are being indoctrinated with hateful ideas. And it really has to be a community-wide approach to dealing with this. But free speech is important too, and freedom to associate is important too. So it's a balancing act, of course.
Thank you. Bob Engler, same question. You have 1 minute.
Yeah, thank you for the question. Back last year when I was mayor, 5 or 6 people went out on the bridge there and unfurled Nazi supporting rhetoric. We as a council took strong action on that. We condemned it. I remember saying from the dais that type of speech and that type of approach to life is not welcome in our town. Now, is it their right to say it? Yeah, you bet. It's a First Amendment thing. They can say what they want. However, we don't have to listen. And most of the reactions we had were in support of our position of condemning this type of speech in our town. Most people rallied around the people that was aimed at. And that's what was a source of pride for me, to see the reaction of my fellow citizens to that sort of speech from 5 people who don't even live in this area.
Thank you. Sharon McMahon, same question. You have 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. It's very personal to me, to be honest. I'm offended by that kind of speech very much. Because of my last name, you wouldn't know it, but I am Jewish. And so it's personal to me. And I feel like the city council did a good job of denouncing it. I would love to see some positive doings. Like, I think the next weekend there was a sign on the freeway of "We love everybody" and that type of thing. I loved that reaction. And I think we need more demonstrative action about loving everybody and accepting everybody, and trying to drown out these voices that they have the right to say it, but we want to drown them out with love and inclusion and respect for everybody. That's all I can say about that. It's just a horrible thing that they have a right to say.
Thank you. Ed Jones, same question. You have 1 minute.
You're muted, Ed.
My wife would like to mute me all the time, so I didn't need to mute myself. Yeah, it's a terrible problem. It's very offensive to hear. We passed a resolution. We try to lead by example by having meetings in which we take the positive approach and so forth. Social media has been a big problem, because people can stir up other people that are less informed and subject to maybe emotional responses, and then we have to deal with it at the local level. I think we ought to have a public debate. I think the people that have these views ought to have to shed the light of day on them. Let's have a debate. You really think these negative things are correct? Well, let's get it all out in the open, and let's air it in front of the world and the city and everybody. See if those views stand up. I mean, that's the American way. And I think that people will reach the right conclusion if they see that these negative things don't really have any foundation that is logical or correct.
Thank you. David Newman, same question. You have 1 minute.
First, as a civil libertarian, I want to acknowledge that the most obnoxious kind of speech is protected. But the standard around free speech is imminent lawless action. When speech leads to imminent lawless action, it is not protected. And when people unfurl banners that drape down onto a freeway, when people wield flagpoles as weapons, as I have personally witnessed multiple times on the Lynn Road overpass, that is not protected for speech, and it needs to be condemned. That's a law enforcement matter. Second, I want to point out that there was significant objection, obstruction, resistance on the part of city staff and multiple members of city council before this resolution was introduced. I'm glad the resolution was passed. I'm not glad it was passed not unanimously. Of course, we had to pass it, But the fact that there was resistance underscores what a problem we have here.
Thank you. Jeff Schwartz, same question. You have 1 minute.
First of all, I do not support hate speech. I support Martin Luther King's dream of 1963. He had a great dream, and I agree with his dream. Now, for a group that goes on the bridge and puts up a Nazi sign, it's my understanding these people were masked. And it's my understanding that their identities were never revealed. So if they have been hiding their identities and masking themselves, it proves they're ashamed of what they're doing. They're ashamed to put their name out in public. They know they are way in the minority and nobody agrees with them. That means we already won. Why did they do this? Probably to get publicity. So the newspapers would write about it. So people would be talking about it for months and years. I think the best punishment for them is to ignore them. These people are juvenile. Let's just ignore them because they are not a danger to me. And incidentally, I'm Jewish and I have a Jewish heritage. And I know the Jews were destroyed by Nazis, but I don't consider these people a threat, especially when they hide their identity.
Thank you. Kyle Rohrbach, same question. You have 1 minute.
Look, the reason that the city finally passed the anti-hate resolution is because literal and actual Nazis were on the overpass over the 101, right? So when we suggest things like sometimes we should just let them air it out, that is ignoring the severity of the problem. And it's not only offensive to our Jewish community in Thousand Oaks, it's offensive to all of our marginalized populations who face threats every single day. So, and you know, with all due respect to Mayor Engler, to say that we took strong action and condemned it, that's not strong action. Strong action is in the root of the question, which is what is the role the city council can play in dismantling systemic racism, right? The system in our municipal government is built on commissions, councils, boards, and we have to start there by including people who are representative of our population and the residents who live here. And it has to start there from the ground up.
Thank you. Thank you, candidates. Our next question is a video question and will be answered by 4 candidates, beginning with Dan Tweed. Each candidate will have 1 minute to respond. The video question comes from 17-year-old Jack Sheldon, a high school senior and resident of Thousand Oaks. Please start the video.
My name is Jack Sheldon. My brother and I have developmental disabilities. It is hard for us to get to where we need to go because public transportation doesn't work for us, making us rely on family members or high-cost ride shares. What will you do to make public transportation work better for community members like us and for everyone who relies on it? Dan Tweed, you have 1 minute.
Well, thanks for that, Jack. I have a niece who's autistic, and I know I probably have neuro non-typicality things that are possibly undiagnosed. But I would use our dial-a-ride infrastructure. I would expand that to our developmentally differently abled community. That's something I think right now is you have to be a senior. We may have already done this. I don't know, but the dial-a-ride is great. You know, I think it's like $1. Maybe it's even free. But they drop you off. They'll pick you up. They'll even wait if it's not a long trip. So other than that, I think we should have actually the drone issue. Pretty soon we're going to have like personal air taxi capabilities coming online, and they can be self-navigating, and that's coming sooner than you think. I think it's really mature technology. So thanks.
Thank you. Sharon McMahon, the question is to you, and I will repeat the question once for the audience. What will you do to make public transportation work better for community members like Jack and for everyone who relies on it? You have 1 minute.
Yes, thank you. I was actually on the Traffic and Transportation Commission for 20 years, and this has been a problem for longer than that. We have a problem for one reason is that we do not have a grid system. So our buses are on routes that are not efficient. That's not something that we can fix very easily. It's very costly. One thing that we were looking at back then, it didn't work out at the time, but was a flex route system, smaller buses and routes that would deviate somewhat from their main route. And when we looked at it, that was a long time before the technology that we have today. And I think we need to look at that again to find if we can get smaller buses and more of them and have flexible routes, they can be more efficient, because the main problem is the time between buses. For what we have, it takes too long to get a bus, and it takes too long to get from point A to point B. And I recognize that. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm over time.
Thank you. David Newman, same question. You have 1 minute.
First, Jack, I want to say I'm sorry the system has failed you. The general principle we should be protecting here is that equal access to any public facility is a civil right. And we need to ensure in all aspects of our local government, of government at all levels, really, that everyone, including yourself, has access to all facilities. So I'll agree with some of the other comments that have been made about how we achieve that. I favor more upgrades to our transit system to accommodate your needs. If buses aren't able to handle people with intellectual or physical disabilities, they need to have that. And I believe as a matter of law, they need to have that. And I would not favor a separate system for you. Everything we know about this is that we need to have you be an integrated member of our society, and we should guarantee that as a right. Thank you.
Thank you. Kyle Rohrbach, same question. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. And thank you, Jack, for submitting your question. To David's point, I apologize, the system isn't working for you yet, and hopefully that's why we're here. I concur with Sharon and David on this. We have the foundations of a transit system that can work for our resident population here, but it doesn't currently. Residents have to work to make it work for them, which is backwards. So we really need to take a hard look at our transit system from the ground up and see what we can do to work around the fact that we don't have a grid system. I also would love for us to look at some neighboring communities, at some of the ideas that they're using. We have Dial-A-Ride, but for anyone who's used Dial-A-Ride recently knows that it's not all that effective. Drivers are late constantly. We need to, make sure that we're actually providing the services that we promise to folks. And I'll just leave you with this. The city of Moore Park has a pilot system of basically a city, Uber, essentially. And I think it's a promising system. We need to think outside the box.
Thank you. Our next round will be Conejo Unido questions, with the candidates answering in pairs. The first question will be directed to Bob Engler, with Jeff Schwartz, with Jeff Schwartz as well. So with Bob Engler is going to answer first, and the question is, some community members find it difficult to engage fully with their city government due to language barriers. How would you work to expand language equity to make city business more accessible and understandable for residents that are currently excluded, in order to encourage greater community participation and help our city better serve all its residents? So Bob Engler, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Yes, that's a good question. The city is currently actively engaged in trying to make sure that we have translation services available at all levels of our interactions with the community. In the last couple of years, we've created translation services available for our city council meeting and boards. There is translation services available in our public works and building department. These are areas of the most interaction. Now, the fact that some people don't feel that they have that access, I think is incumbent upon us to let people know that those services are available and that they are there for their use and making it easier for them to interact with the city.
Thank you. Next up is Jeff Schwartz. And the question to you is, some community members find it difficult to engage fully with their city government due to language barriers. How would you work to expand language equity to make city businesses more accessible and understandable for residents that are currently excluded in order to encourage greater community participation and help our city better serve all its residents? You have 1 minute.
I think there's a very serious issue. Everyone should be able to communicate with the government regardless of what their language issues are. So we have to look at all the alternatives. Do we need to hire bureaucrats as translators? Or are there other alternatives? Can we think outside the box? Can we consider possibly getting an ad hoc committee to see if we can get some of the private sector, such as service groups, Kiwanis Club, Lions Club, and other clubs like that, to see if we can get volunteers in the community to do this, maybe even at no charge to the city. But clearly it is a major issue, and I think the city council members can take a lead in communicating the need for the community to come together with solutions. Maybe we need an ad hoc committee to study this.
Thank you. The next Conejo Unido question will be directed to Sharon McMahon and Kyle Roback, with Sharon McMahon answering first. And the question is, the needs of residents with intellectual and developmental disabilities are often left out of the equation when plans, programs, and policies are discussed by city leaders. If elected, what will you do to provide lifelong opportunities for people with IDD to work, play, and thrive in our city? Sharon McMahon, you have 1 minute.
That is a really good question, and I do not have an answer. This is something, I have a friend who has a daughter in that situation. She's panicked, and I know that it's not just her. There's a lot of people who are concerned, and I do not know. What I need is I need information, I need experts, and I need ideas. And this ad hoc committee that I've been talking about for people who are unheard needs to include people who can express a need and tell us on the council and city staff exactly what would help, because we're not experts. We're not living that life, and we don't know. And I'm not afraid to say, I don't know, but I need to get the information from the people who do know.
Thank you. Next up is Kyle Roback, and the question is to you. The needs of residents with intellectual and developmental disabilities are often left out of the equation when plans, programs, and policies are discussed by city leaders. If elected, what would you do to provide lifelong opportunities for people with IDD to work, play, and thrive in our city? Kyle Roback, you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I think Sharon brings up a really important point, which is an understanding that unless you are somebody who has intellectual and developmental disabilities, or is a family member or friend of someone, then you don't really have the experience to be able to make some of those experiences or some of those decisions. And your question specifically says they're often left out. And I think the answer is a simple one, which is literal inclusion. And that means that from a city council perspective, like I mentioned earlier, we have an ability to appoint planning commissioners, traffic and transportation commissioners, advisory councils, arts roundtables, small business roundtables. And that's where we need to make sure that we're including and welcoming folks who do have those experiences into the room so that they're a part of the decision making from the very beginning.
Thank you. The next Conejo Unido question will be directed to Ed Jones and Anwil Khurshid, with Ed Jones answering first. The question is, currently, the property at the lake stands all but empty, though the developer is promising that the new luxury apartment complex will attract new tenants. How might the city reimagine and realize its vision of a walkable and vibrant downtown center by creating a hub for work and play for residents of all income levels? You have 1 minute.
Well, you know, that was planned before I was elected. And I see a lot of problems with it because Thousand Oaks Boulevard does not lend itself to walking and shopping and having little boutiques and museums and dress shops and restaurants and so forth, because it's a wide street and it is our most heavily traveled east-west street. If there's a tie-up on the freeway, it's, you know, really congested. And this new development that you're speaking of is going to add further congestion to the street. So I was not in on the planning of trying to make a semi-downtown with an extra street that you may know was supposed to be parallel to Teal Boulevard that would be interior to that parcel. I don't know if selling that land to Caruso inhibited that plan and if it's still on the books or not. But it was a rather elaborate plan. I just say that Thousand Oaks Boulevard really is not going to lend itself to a downtown area. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Anwil Khurshid. And the question to you is, currently, the property at the lake stands all but empty, though the developer is promising that the new luxury apartment complex will attract new tenants. How might the city reimagine and realize its vision of a walkable and vibrant downtown center by creating a hub for work and play for residents of all income levels? You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Doctor. You know, we are kind of stuck with what we have at that Caruso development. So we need to make what we can out of the situation and make it work. I think there is an opportunity to make that area walkable. I think if we could link it somehow to the Civic Center and the Civic Center master plan that's in the process, that might be a way where we have these two areas where people can walk to and enjoy. You know, putting aside the really high 6-story buildings that'll be going into the project there and how that might you know, impact the views and the feel. Mr. Caruso has had projects which are walkable, the Brand, the Grove, areas which have people that are walking around in them. And if there is a developer that has the vision that could do something with that, if in partnership with the city, I think, and I'm maybe hopeful that that Caruso would be someone that could help with that.
Thank you. The next Conejo Unido question will be directed to David Newman and Dan Tweed, with David Newman answering first. The question is, the mental health crisis response system is broken. More often than not, a call for help results in a visit from armed police officers rather than the intervention needed to de-escalate the situation. What can our city do to change this dynamic and safely support our community members experiencing mental health crisis? David Newman, you have 1 minute.
Well, the important thing is that we have to treat this as the mental health problem that it is, and not as a law enforcement problem. I have family members both in law enforcement and in social work and mental health. And I think both of them would agree that first and foremost, we need more resources for public health to offload law enforcement officers from doing a job that they shouldn't have been asked to do in the first place. Secondly, I think we need additional funding at the county and state levels to shore up our mental health services. We've defunded that over many decades. We're not going to be able to solve that in the next 17 seconds, but we do need to ensure that our public health officers have the resources they need to help our residents in need of those services to get them healthy again.
Thank you. Next up is Dan Tweed. And the question to you is, the mental health crisis response system is broken. More often than not, a call for help results in a visit from armed police officers rather than the intervention needed to de-escalate the situation. What can our city do to change this dynamic and safely support our community members experiencing mental health crises? You have 1 minute.
Well, you know, I've talked about this technology called digital twin, and I think this would really be a great utilization. We could look at past response situations where armed officers have shown up to something that should have been resolved with community service personnel, and we could calibrate the funding levels. We could say, okay, we need more police here and more community service officers there, and we could also address these mental health issues before they become critical. There's a gal who spoke at the last city council meeting about something called Ilana's Law. And under our Gold Coast insurance system, you can either have a psychiatrist or a therapist, but not both. And because her daughter, a 26-year-old daughter, couldn't get the talk therapy she needed, there was a tragic outcome there. So there's both proactive and before the fact and after the fact responses that we need to integrate. Thanks.
Thank you. Our next round will be a question from me for all of the candidates, with Sharon McMahon answering first. The question is, if elected, what specific processes and/or actions would you champion to make sure that the city of Thousand Oaks reaches its top goal of creating a more equitable, accessible, safe, welcoming, and inclusive government and community, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, religion, sex, physical or mental ability, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, age, language, education, and our socioeconomic status? Sharon McMahon, you have 1 minute.
Whoa, that's a lot to answer. First of all, we need the people in our community to feel like they are respected, to feel like they have a voice, and to feel like we want them there. And one of the things we need to do is to provide housing for everybody and access to affordable housing. And the thing about that is this general plan update that we're working on now. That will help, and it will go a long way towards creating a more lively, vibrant, walkable downtown with housing that is affordable, with housing that is walkable to restaurants, to shopping. And that's one thing we can do. The other thing is just our policies. The city council sets policy, and so we need to direct city staff to make sure that everyone is as inclusive when they're dealing with the public as they can possibly be.
Thank you. Ed Jones, the question is to you, and I will repeat it once for the audience. If elected, what specific processes and/or actions would you champion to make sure that the city of Thousand Oaks reaches its top goal of creating a more equitable, accessible, safe, welcoming, and inclusive government and community, regardless of color, race, ethnicity, religion, sex, physical or mental ability, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, age, language, education, and/or socioeconomic status? You have 1 minute.
Well, that's quite a question. I think we try to do that right now. We train our people in those matters, and so that they will present that milieu to the people that come to the city. We try to be welcoming. We try to have policies that will make people feel comfortable when they come here. I don't know the whole list of things that you just recited, but it's a mindset. It's an attitude. We have a warm, welcoming attitude in Thousand Oaks, and we have policies with our personnel in accommodating each other, that they do not indulge in anything that would be considered negative behavior, and certainly that applies to the people. I have a policy of walking door to door very thoroughly And I do that because I want to try to understand our community and whatever problems there might be. And I think our city takes the same attitude. We're a warm, welcoming city doing our best, and we find something that needs improvement, we do it.
Thank you. David Newman, same question. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. I think we have to address our housing issue, and that is inextricably linked with economic empowerment. We're really good right now at building some kind of housing, luxury housing, to the exclusion of almost everything else. So let's solve that in 2 ways. Number one, as has been mentioned previously, we need to bring back our inclusionary housing ordinance to include more housing people can afford. And we should do that, in my opinion, without an in lieu fee, which lets developers wriggle out of including that affordable component for working families. Number two, if all we do is put 80 to 100% market rate units that are all apartments, we make affordability worse. So we need to start talking again about having units to buy, about getting equity for all members of our community, not just the most well-off. And really through that economic empowerment comes civic empowerment. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff Schwartz, same question. You have 1 minute.
My campaign theme is love and liberty. And one of my slogans is love all the folks in Thousand Oaks. So we should be doing that. And I think we're doing a pretty good job. But if we need more training of staff, we should do that. If we need to discipline staff who are not meeting the standards of these goals, we should do that. But one other thing we should do is we need to empower our citizenry to the point where, yes, economic empowerment, where they're less dependent on these government agencies. We want ideally people to live free lives and not be dependent on the government for handing this out or handing that out. How do we empower people? We reduce the burden that they have to pay in to an expensive bureaucracy and government. How do we do that? We need to streamline government, cut red tape, cut unnecessary regulation, and cut the expense of government, which will allow us to reduce the taxes and reduce the inflation, which is destroying our economic empowerment. We can do all that. All we need is love and liberty. Jeff Schwartz for Thousand Oaks Council.
Thank you. Kyle Rohrbach, same question. You have 1 minute.
I think the nature of the length of the question shows the broad spectrum of which the topic encompasses. And when you're dealing with that level of complexity and that spectrum of our community, it requires bold action. In this case, we always have to remind ourselves, what is it that's within the power of the city council to do? And we are a manager and staff run city council or in city. And I think it's extremely important that we champion having a dedicated staff member to hold ourselves accountable, to hold city council accountable, to hold the city accountable, to make sure that we are putting that DEI lens over every topic that we're talking about. So I would heavily advocate for that from the very beginning.
Thank you. And Will Khurshid, same question. You have 1 minute.
Thank you, Doctor, and I won't have you repeat that question. What I would do is, first of all, get data about all those groups and get input from all those groups and get a sense of what it is exactly that they have a concern about and what it is exactly that they feel needs to be changed. Then I would focus on the major employers in our city. The city has approximately 500 staff. I would look at how the city is doing things, as Kyle mentioned. I would also look at the medium and larger employers in the city and determine, well, how are you treating people? And are you addressing the concerns that are being raised by our residents? So that's how I would approach it in a methodical way. The city council should promote that and get input and inclusion by receiving data from its residents, and then going out and trying to see where the problems are and going out and trying to find some solutions to those problems.
Thank you. Dan Tweed, same question. You have 1 minute.
Actually, could you repeat it? I want to make sure I get it right.
Sure, I can repeat it. If elected, what specific processes and or actions would you champion to make sure that the city of Thousand Oaks reaches its top goal of creating a more equitable, accessible, safe, welcoming, and inclusive government and community, regardless of race, color, ethnicity, religion, sex, physical or mental ability, sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, age, language, education, and or socioeconomic status?
Got it.
And you have 1 minute.
Yeah, I think we don't have enough neighbor-to-neighbor contact. One thing I would love to see is if every block in Thousand Oaks had sort of like a what's called a skill share, where the neighbors are actually trading hours of labor amongst each other. Like someone needs their oil changed for an hour and someone needs their dog walk. They do a swap on these little communities of like 150 people, which is about what lives on a block. And you get to know each other with a monthly potluck. And these skill shares are actually interesting because since it's labor trading for labor, it's not a taxable equation according to the IRS. So this is a kind of alternative currency, and it's the kind of thing that most neighbors don't know each other, and it's just one more thing that could really create that feeling of camaraderie in a neighborhood. I don't see the timer, so.
Bob Engler, same question. You have 1 minute.
Thank you. As the person who authored the goal that was adopted by the council 2 years ago, creating conditions for a very diverse and inclusionary workforce is very dear to my heart. One of the things we need to do is lead by example. So what do we do in our city? Our senior staff is more than 50% female. Of that senior staff, at least 1/3 is people of color. That's how you lead by example. We require all of our employees, including our city council, to take sensitivity training classes. This is something we require. Earlier in our discussions, Kyle mentioned that we should increase our commissions. That's underway right now. Our commissions are changing based on that goal that I did author. So I'm proud of where we're going. We have more work to be done.
Thank you. And that concludes the question and answer portion of our evening. Now we will move to candidate closing statements. Our first closing statement will be given by Bob Engler, and you have 1 minute.
Thank you. Yes, in last night's closing statement, I mentioned, you don't have to think about how I will act. I have a record. You can look at my record. Bringing the goal of diversity and equity to our city was one way that you can judge me. Being involved in approving housing and insisting on as much affordable housing as we can get is another way you can judge me. This is who I am. This is how I will lead the city. This is how I will leave the city in a better place than when I got here. Thank you very much for having this discussion tonight. It's been very elucidating, and I appreciate everything that my colleagues tonight have said.
Thank you. Our next closing statement will be by Dan Tweed, and you have 1 minute.
Sure. I'm Dan Tweed. I've run twice before with really no donations or spending of money, because actually there was a process called sortition where you would sort of fill government offices like you'd get jury duty service. So I'm kind of continuing this experiment to see if I can keep doubling my votes. But I think there's a lot of functions that we currently rely on government for that could be disintermediated, or we could cut out the middleman by going direct person to person, voluntary pre-association. And we've only begun to scratch the surface of that. And one thing I think we could be, there's cities like 29 Palms. It's known as the city of murals. It's out there in the desert. They've got a mural like on every building. What I think a great goal for Thousand Oaks would be, let's be the city of little free libraries. And let's not just do physical libraries, but digital libraries, like these little, weatherproof thumb drives. You could hang them on your mailbox, and neighbors could share ideas and resolutions. I'm out of time, but yeah, remember to vote November 8th. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Our next closing statement will be by Anwil Khurshid, and you have 1 minute.
Well, first, thank you, Dr. Munoz, for moderating, and for Conejo Unido for hosting, and appreciate all the candidates' times and input. As I mentioned last night, Thousand Oaks is a special place, and I want to keep it that way. That's the sole reason why I'm running for city council. It's as simple as that. My top priority is doing what's best for the city and its residents. I won't let the city's interests fall. I will advocate for the residents. I will bring creativity and advocacy for what's best for its residents. I think that's key to keep this place special for the next generation, and to keep it special for the next 25 years. Mr. Jones and others have done a great job in creating such a special place, and we need to do all that we can to protect it. And that's what I'm here for. And I would be honored to have your vote, and please help me keep Thousand Oaks special.
Thank you. And our next closing statement will be by Kyle Roebuck, and you have 1 minute.
Thank you, Dr. Munoz, and thank you, Conejo Unido, again for this conversation. I mentioned at the beginning that my professional background is as a producer, and by the nature of that job, the professional skill set that I've honed over the last many years is really rooted in people and fiduciary responsibility and decision making. And those translate directly to ensuring that we're able to guide a city forward, not just for this generation, but also for the next. And I think at the end of the day, you want to know that the folks that you're voting for are going to make a commitment to put the city first, to lead with transparent, fact-based governance, and ensure that we actually have a truly representative government here in Thousand Oaks. And I can make that commitment to all of you right here today. So I would love to earn one of your 3 votes. Again, my name is Kyle Roebuck, and I'm running for Thousand Oaks City Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next closing statement will be by Jeff Schwartz, and you have 1 minute.
You're muted, Mr. Schwartz.
Oh. How is that? Is that good?
Yeah.
I'm Jeff Schwartz for Thousand Oaks Council. My website is jeff4to.com. And incidentally, I do have a Spanish click on my website where you can get a translation into Spanish for my basic platform. I've been studying economic issues and government issues for 32 years. I have solutions that nobody's been talking about. I want you to go on my website and take a look at some of my video playlists. I have video playlists on every issue. We have ways of making your life more free and better, and improving your wealth too. So we want to reduce taxes, reduce the size and necessary scope of government to the point where you don't have to pay as much in taxes and you don't have to pay as much as inflation. Is Jeff4to, Jeff Schwartz for Thousand Oaks Council. Thank you very much.
And thank you. Our next closing statement will be by David Newman, and you have 1 minute.
Thank you. This election is about who decides what's best for Thousand Oaks. I think you should be the one who makes that call, not special interests. I stand for strengthening our community by meeting the needs we actually have, not the needs that best serve developer profits or the demands of a few political extremists trying to impose their views on the rest of us. We have a really good thing here, and importantly, a really well-planned thing here. And that didn't happen by accident. It takes people who have great competence and experience in government. It takes planning to nurture our local businesses and to protect our open space. And it takes a willingness to stand up for our residents, for all our residents. I'm David Newman, and I will be your advocate on the Thousand Oaks City Council. Muchas gracias a todo el mundo. Yo soy David Newman. Thank you very much. My name is David Newman. Good evening.
Thank you. Our next closing statement will be by Ed Jones, and you have 1 minute.
You know, I love these fora, if we call them that. I'm intrigued by all of the ideas that I've heard tonight. I think we have a wonderful group of candidates, and I'd like to salute them all. And I hope Dan Tweet gets his 6% because he contributes most of the intellectual content, I think, to these meetings. I think I've run with him before, and I remember from those times. You know, I've always thought of Thousand Oaks as a family. And when I walk door to door, quite often people tell me what's happened in the preceding 4 years to their children that were maybe in high school then and now they're in college. And of course, if I go back to the early days, I think I've been in 10 contests. I lost 2 of them, so I'm not perfect. But it's a wonderful community. I'm very proud to be here, and I think we have wonderful candidates, and I wish them all well. Thank you.
Thank you. And our next closing statement will be by Sharon McMahon, and you have 1 minute.
Thank you. I am the most experienced non-incumbent running for this city council seat. I have been active in the community for 37 years. I've been active in the city for 26 years. But look at these beautiful faces. Men, we are a city where we need diversity and inclusion. Claudia Bill de la Pena is leaving the council. We need a woman's perspective, especially in 2022. And I have the background, and I have the knowledge, and I have the experience. And how can you, who emphasize diversity and inclusion, elect 5 members who are male to bring the city forward for the future? This is 2022. We haven't had an all 5 male council for 30 years, and we can't go back to that now.
Thank you. And as our forum draws to a close, on behalf of Conejo Unido and our community, I would like to thank all of the candidates for their participation tonight. Running for office is not an easy task, and we want to thank you for your willingness to take on the role of public servant and to ask questions and to answer questions about your positions. And thank you to the audience for attending and for your passion for local government in our city. We hope you leave here tonight feeling more informed about the candidates and their vision for Thousand Oaks. As for me, I am glad to have had this opportunity and grateful to all the volunteers who made tonight possible. Thank you. And now, Linda Carl from Adelante Comunidad Conejo will share some closing words. Thank you.
My name is Linda Carl. I am president of Adelante Comunidad Conejo, a member of the Conejo Unido coalition, along with Buen, Vecino, and Thrive Conejo. Thank you to all the neighbors who attended this evening. I hope the forum has been informative and helpful. We urge everyone who is eligible to vote to make sure your voter registration is up to date, to cast your vote in the upcoming election, and to encourage family, friends, neighbors, and co-workers to do so as well. A link to the Ventura County Elections Division website, where you can check your voter registration status and get election information, is posted in the chat box. The Elections Division website is accessible in English, Spanish, and several other languages. A link to a map of ballot drop-off locations and in-person voting locations in Thousand Oaks is also posted in the chat box. Thank you to each of the candidates for participating in our forum tonight and for your willingness to run office. Thank you to the wonderful Dr. Munoz for serving as our moderator, Thank you to our interpreters, our technical support team, and to the community members who provided questions for the candidates. It is a beautiful thing to see so many people come together for the benefit of our community. Gracias a todos y buenas noches. Good night, everyone.